Hello, everyone, and welcome to Transportation Talks. My name is Michelle Livingstone, and I have the privilege of interviewing the top leaders in the transportation industry. And today I am so excited for our guest, Daniel Walsh, President and CEO of TRAC Intermodal. Dan, turn your camera on and join me.
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
Oh, Dan, it's so good to see you. It's been since before COVID since our paths last crossed, and
Yeah,
it's good to see you.
it's lovely to see you too. And thanks very much for inviting me on. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, we're glad to have you. We love to get to know our guests and a little bit more, a little deeper than what a LinkedIn profile will share with you. And I'm just curious if you could tell us a little bit about yourself. The one thing that I do remember from one of our early interactions years ago was that we joked about your Southern accent. So tell us more about that too.
Yeah, well, as you can tell from the accent, I'm from the deep, deep South, and that's a line that I've fallen back on many times over the years, and proudly so. I'm from Sydney, Australia, originally. I was born and raised in the city, and I lived in Australia quite happily for the first 30 years of my life. I went to university there, I graduated there, and I was working initially in the mining industry. Then I joined an Australian multinational called Brambles, which is a bit of a weird company from an Australian perspective. It's got a global footprint, and 95% of the revenue and profit is made in Europe and the US, despite it being headquartered in Australia. So I was there in Sydney with them for a while. I went to Melbourne for a bit, came back to Sydney, and then I moved with them to London via South America and Central America. We went backpacking for 6 months on our way over there, my wife and I. And, I spent 8 great years in London. We had a couple of kids while we were over there. And then we moved to America in 2010, again with Brambles. And I spent the last 5 years of my tenure there running one of their operating divisions in North America before I went to work for XPO Logistics as president of their last mile division. And, I was there for just over 3 years and then joined TRAC in August of 2020, right in the middle of COVID, actually. So, as usual with me, the timing was perfect, but we have had a great run. I've been there ever since. As I mentioned, I'm married to an Australian, Simon. We've been together for a long time, 30 years. We've been married for 25. And we have two sons. Our eldest son, Xavier, 19, is a student in London, and Dom, our youngest, is 17 in his senior year here in Atlanta. So we're approaching empty nest stage, Michelle. So Lord knows what that's going to bring us, but we won't be intimidated by the future, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, that really sounds exciting. So I'm just curious. You went from Brambles and then you came into the transportation industry. And how did that happen? What made you wake up one morning and say, "Yeah, this is a great idea"?
Well, the way I got into supply chain generally was through love. At the time, I was working in the mining industry for Shell in outback Australia, and my then girlfriend, now wife, was in Sydney, and I desperately wanted to get back to Sydney to be with her. And so an opportunity came up with Brambles, who I'd never heard of, and they happened to be in the logistics and supply chain business. And I managed to talk my way into a job with them, so that was my ticket back. And then, when I got into that industry, I just found that I really fitted in well with it. I think people who do well in our industry are problem solvers. The one thing about our industry, something goes wrong every day. It's guaranteed. It's just how you react to it. And I really enjoyed that. I felt the people that were in the industry were humble, hardworking, good people in general, and people that I liked being around. Family oriented, most of them, just active in their communities, good humans. And so I found it a really affirming career. And I also thought that for someone with a bit of drive and get up and go, there was lots of opportunity. And you learn generic skills along the way, working with Brambles that I could apply then in transportation when I moved to XPO Logistics, and then, to the intermodal sector with TRAC. So, in my assessment, there's a lot of kind of tangential activities which exist under the broad banner of logistics and supply chain when you get a little more granular. and there's a good, if you've got a good generic skill set, you can make a contribution in each of them. So, I've been very fortunate to have found my way into this segment. When I was at university, it was impossible to do a supply chain degree. Now they're everywhere, and obviously, the University of Denver does a fantastic one for the Supply Chain Institute. So I've been very fortunate, consider myself very lucky to have ended up in our industry.
Well, I think that is a great background and I appreciate you sharing. So as you think about the transferable skills, what helped prepare you best to be CEO of TRAC Intermodal?
Well, I'd like to think that whilst you have an awareness of your own capabilities and your ability to influence and all the rest of it, I think a little bit of humility goes a long way. Michelle, I think I'd like to think I take the job seriously, I take the customers seriously, but I don't take myself too seriously. I think that you have to be humble enough to know that there are going to be people that can teach you something new each and every day, and then be open to it. But at the same time, I do think you need to be confident in your ability to organise a diverse group of individuals around a common objective, and manage them to that objective. So stressing the criticality of results, making sure that you have a wide range of views and opinions available to you to best address complex questions, and making sure that you have the necessary resilience to see these things through to the end. Those are all critical, as is a good sense of humour. I think it's really important that you're able to take a joke in life generally, but certainly in our industry and certainly in my job.
Yeah, well, definitely. Resilience and a good sense of humor are probably the two most important traits that are needed. But you know what? We shouldn't assume that everybody knows what TRAC Intermodal is. I'm, certainly well known in the marketplace. But tell us more. Tell us about TRAC.
Yeah, look, TRAC's a great company. When I was coming over to TRAC, obviously, did my due diligence. I knew of the business. XPO had an intermodal division, and TRAC was obviously active in the space. It's actually a great American story, in my opinion. It was formed in 1968 in Princeton, New Jersey, and it was around the time the gentleman who founded it was a guy called Marty Tuckman, and he could just see the acceleration of containerization taking place. He'd actually won an innovation award for a triple lock mechanism for putting containers on chassis to make them travel more safely, as opposed to them just being bound down. And he initially started up a container leasing business, but then in the 80s they moved into what they called track lease at the time, when they had put 35,000 chassis out there. And by 2000, they were the biggest provider of chassis in North America. So the business has been the market leader, for 25 years now. Over the subsequent 25 years from 2000, a lot of innovation around technology. They introduced EasyBook, which is an online booking system, TRAC Select, which is a premium pool where you can actually, utilize technology to arrange premium chassis for yourself. And then they added other business units. They added what's called MSUs, which are mobile service units, which are perform maintenance and repair, particularly on rail ramps, but also on the terminals for people using chassis. And TRAC Services, which is our own maintenance and repair operations, basically, which we run through our dedicated service centers. We have 6 dedicated service centers, but we have 60 depots and over 600 locations where we operate across the country. And then in 2021, we bought another company called TRAC Tire, which has since branded TRAC Tire, and we're the largest retreader of tires in America. So that was a nice piece of vertical integration for our business. And since then, we've been very fortunate to be able to maintain our market leading position, and well established in the industry, deep relationships with customers and vendors go back 40, 50 years in a lot of cases. So we're in the business of doing business with people for a long time, and we're very thoughtful about that. So it was a company that I thought had an enviable market position, good barriers to entry, great reputation amongst their customers, focus on customer service. And I was really thankful and humbled, frankly, to be given a chance to join the business. So it's been a great run since I've been here for the last 5 years, and I really like working here.
Well, yeah, sounds like you've accomplished a lot. So congratulations on that.
Well, thank you.
As you look forward for the next 5 to 10 years, what are you anticipating? What is that vision going to look like?
Yeah, well, I mean, very simply for us, Michelle, our strategy is and always will be to grow the business. Like we will want to grow our business and we want to grow it profitably. And I think that sometimes, having something clear like that and simple like that is really important. It's a good North Star, if you like, to fall back on when you're caught up in the permanent whitewater of daily work. You actually see something that can guide you, and that's our strategy, is to grow the business. And I think, how are we going to do that? Well, in a couple of ways. So there's actually two ways, really, and I'm simplifying for the purposes of our discussion, but there's actually two ways you can get a chassis. One is through what's called a chassis pool, where multiple contributors provide units and people take them out if they need them, and you get paid on a utilisation basis. The other one is term lease, where you take a long-term lease of a number of chassis and you pay a rate every day, irrespective of whether you use it or not. Our business, we've morphed our business materially from the pools, although we still operate 13 pools and always will be, deep in pools, into term lease. We like that model, and that business has continued to grow for us over the years, and we think that there's a lot of runway there for us, and so we'll do that. We're interested in the domestic pooling space. TRAC built and ran the largest domestic pool in North America before selling it in 2018. We were contracted out for a period, but now we're back in that market, and that business is growing very nicely for us. We think that's wide open. We think there's an opportunity for more competition in that segment of the market, and we're happy to provide it, and we're getting a lot of support there. So that's been good. And then always mergers and acquisitions. We're always thinking about M&A. For a long time there, when the core business was performing so well, it was very difficult to justify actually going into tangential space, because the return that you get on that investment was eclipsed by what you were doing in your core biz. Whilst that's still the case, there's some very interesting businesses out there, and we continue to look at those. We've got a great partner. We're owned by Stone Peak Infrastructure Partners, a private equity company based in New York, and they've been fantastic supporters of our business, and and they're very open to supporting us on our growth journey. So we're very excited about where we're going to take the business the next 5 to 10 years. We feel good about it.
Well, that's great. So it sounds like you plan to grow organically and potentially through acquisitions as well. So it seems like you're well poised for success, which
Yeah,
is
we're
really
pretty excited about it. We think that, if you believe in global trade, which we do, which is, interesting at the moment, it's probably been more in question now than it has been in the last 50 years, to be honest. But
yes.
we believe it's up and to the right. And there's actually, if you look at the historical data, there's a really strong correlation between, GDP growth and the growth in utilisation of containers and chassis. So as long as the GDP is growing, our business is growing. So we feel confident about the future.
Well, that's great. So I know there's a lot of pressure for supply chain visibility,
Yeah.
and you mentioned it sounds like you have some tools that may be helpful, but how are you reacting to that increased pressure for faster throughput and better visibility?
Yeah, I mean, look, GPS is a big part of us. We've got a great provider, BlackBerry, that we've been working with, and we tag up our units when our customers want it. And that can provide all sorts of information. In fact, the telematics is getting really, really good now. For a while there, it could basically, on occasion, tell you where it was until the battery went flat.
Right.
But now it's much more value added. You can learn about hard braking incidents. You can learn about whether a chassis is under load or bare. You can learn about the period of time since it's moved, where it's moving to. So that sort of stuff's very interesting. And we've been able, on the back of that technology, to innovate around the product offering. So we put a product out there called TRAC Geofence, which is where customers would take a term lease of units, as we discussed, and they keep them in their yards. So it's not suitable for everyone, but for customers that have space, it works. And then they pay a base rate, for across the chassis, but they only pay extra when they take the chassis outside of the geofence, which is created by the unit. So it's they have the chassis, they have the guaranteed supply, but they only pay when they actually use them for the full rate. So, that's helpful for us because it expands our footprint. It's good for our customers. We're in the business of saying yes to our customers. And there's product innovation on the back of technology, which we're all about. So that's been a nice introduction for us, and that's been very well received by the market, which is great.
Yeah, it's like in retail, it's on consignment. You
Yeah,
you have the product available to sell, but if it doesn't get sold, then there's a lower risk strategy for your customer. Did I get that right?
yeah, 100%. And look, once you start looking into it, with technology improves exponentially. If you think back to you and I, Michelle, probably of a vintage to remember the first mobile phones. I can remember my friend Steph walking around with a backpack on. And now look at them. And I think that's where we are with obviously artificial intelligence, but also GPS. Like the technology is just improving at such a rapid rate. The challenge for executives will be able to keep pace with it first of all, but then to understand how to deploy it in a way which helps you move into new space faster than your competitor and make money.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds exciting to think about the innovation that's going to continue to take place. So
Yeah,
that's
great.
good. So you mentioned about ports, and imports are obviously still a challenge and probably will remain a challenge for years to come. And of course, that impacts ports and drayage opportunities and all of that. What are you watching most closely in this area?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question. I mean, everything is the answer, I guess, at the moment. I mean, like, you know, obviously the biggest factor in the last 6 to 12 months has obviously been the tariffs. I mean, that has just been critical for a couple of reasons. One is it's caused a lot of whipsawing around volume, right? And so, volumes pull forward periodically when people try and beat the tariffs, and then there's no volume when the tariffs come in play, and then they get extended again, and so everyone jumps in front. But it's not actually new volume. It's just the same volume chopped up into different pieces and provided differently, which puts a bit of pressure on the supply chain and the participants in the supply chain that are meant to move that stuff around. That's the first thing. But then the other thing I think is that it's made the investment horizon more opaque than people like. It's just hard to be certain about what's going to happen. And look, CEOs can get canned for a bunch of things, but getting a big capital decision wrong is one surefire way to the exit door. And so people are holding back. They're just because they're not sure. They get a long way down the road on certain things, and they think this is the way they're going to go. But then they're pulling back at the last minute, and that sort of uncertainty is very bad, in my opinion, for business. That's bad, And so whether or not you have a position on tariffs, whether they're right or wrong, is almost immaterial. But we need some calmer seas. We need a steady state, I think, so that we can start to look forward. So that's something I've got my eye on. The growth of IPI, like inland point cargo, is something that I think is something that's quite interesting. It's up 7.8% in the first half compared to last year. A lot of volume is coming over the docks and going straight inland. And I think that in itself, it just changes the way products are distributed in the United States, and that means you have to move assets around, make sure your infrastructure is appropriately positioned for that new dynamic. I think that's an important factor. I think about automation a lot. You'll know this from your days running transportation at depot, Michelle. The holy grail is the unmanned truck, right? That can run 24 hours on the power lanes and all that sort of stuff. And whilst we're not there yet, it feels like that there is movement in that direction. There's unmanned taxis here in Atlanta. There's unmanned taxis in San Francisco. I caught one the other day. It was perfect. I think that technology is coming, and that sort of stuff's going to change. And then AI, of course, is part of that whole automation thing. The way I think about artificial intelligence, and we've got a very strong artificial intelligence program at TRAC. Everything that is transactional will be automated. And if you start thinking about that in detail, then you realise the scale of the impact that's going to have, on our businesses. And so that's that. And then the other thing I think about is geopolitical uncertainty. I think that this is probably the most fractious relationships have been between the big powers since the Second World War, in my opinion. And if you look, there's a war on continental Europe. You've got problems in the South Pacific. And obviously the Middle East is challenging. And we're part of a global enterprise here, and those things have an effect. So some of those things are kind of challenging to think about. But my mum used to say, "Don't be intimidated by the future; just go for it." And I think that there's going to be a lot of great things that are going to come out of it as well. So I always land on the optimistic side of things. So I think it's all going to be good, and I think it's going to be great. But I do think it's going to be different. I think it's going to be different from what we've got today.
Yes, I'm sure. And your mother took a more optimistic perspective. My mother was always, honey, nothing so bad that it can't get worse. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, thanks, Mom. So
But
if you
see,
ever wonder why I am the way I am, listen to that all your life.
that sense of humor that we were talking about.
Yeah,
I quite
exactly.
like that, actually. Like that's cynical enough for me to really get behind. You know.
That's right. You talked about the uncertainty, and obviously, there are enough things that happen in the supply chain that this added uncertainty is certainly not needed for sure. But in the end, it's really all about customer service,
Yeah.
and I know that that's what you're all about. How are you measuring customer service, and how you're making investments all the time? Are you seeing those investments pay off from a customer service perspective?
Yeah, look, I think that's an excellent question. We believe in customer service, like we staff for it, and at TRAC, we say to ourselves and to our customers, we answer the call. If the phone rings, we pick it up, and if someone's looking for an answer, we'll give them one. It might not be the one that they like, but you'll definitely get an answer from us, and we believe in service because we think it's not as altruistic as it might sound. We believe that's a major factor in the retention rates that we've had, amongst our customers, which, as I said, a lot of our customers have been with us almost half a century, and so that's very important for us. It's affirming for us, and we really, like a lot of people in logistics and supply chain, we like being able to help customers when they're in a real pickle, and try and do everything we can to get them out of that, and we get rewarded for that, with ongoing business. So, obviously technology is a big part of that. We continue to automate at the customer interface. We built our own CMS system called Helix, which is much more customer friendly than what we had in the past. That lets customers, examine their invoices and their activity. It facilitates easy ordering. We've done a lot of work on that. We supplement our customer service staff with chat bots and various links to websites and so forth that can help people manage the complexity of their supply chain operations. And also we invest a lot of time in terms of being active in the community. We support the same things that our customers support. We participate in our local community. We encourage our employees to participate in our local community. We feel that builds really strong relationships with our customers. And we have a kickoff event every year, and the first day is dedicated to just listening to customers and vendors. And we've had fantastic guest speakers, CEO level, board member people, who'll come and talk to you if you're prepared to listen. So we like to think that we make customer service a real priority at TRAC, and we listen a lot, and then we take decisive action to try and support our customers, and it's paid off for us, I must say.
It certainly sounds like it. So I would definitely stick with that strategy. And the whole giving back is such an important characteristic for both the business community as well as your associates. I'm sure they really appreciate that.
Yeah, I got to hand it to every people at all levels of the organisation and all ages do it, but our younger people in particular insist on it. They're better than we were, or than I was anyway at that age. They really, you try and recruit high quality people, and we do recruit high quality people, which is great when you get them, but it means they often have a choice. And
Yes.
one of the questions you get asked a lot at TRAC when people are coming on board is, tell me about what you do to support, your causes, and how you're active in the community, and what do you do And we've got a really detailed program. We give people days off to volunteer, and we publish our efforts in that regard. And it just goes to who our people are and who we are, and it's important to us.
Well, that's great. I hope that continues for decades to come. That's really important.
Thank you.
And probably one of the other questions that you get asked about is sustainability.
Oh yeah.
I know, things are a little, uh, maybe a little more rocky or contentious on the whole sustainability front. But in the end, I think a lot of people still believe that it's very important. And I'm just curious, how is TRAC Intermodal looking at sustainability, and do you have a long-term strategy that you're working toward?
Yeah, look, we're big on sustainability. I was actually talking to a guy last night at dinner, a senior executive, about this, and I don't have a lot of time for companies that just like write off the environment, that are kind of ambivalent about their impact on the environment. And I just it goes back to thinking about it as on a personal level. If someone came into your home for a dialogue and just lit up a cigarette and then put it out on the arm of your sofa or something like that, you'd be underwhelmed at best.
Yes.
And
At best.
there's a way of going about such things, and I think it's very important. And irrespective of the political flavour or societal positions at the point, I mean, we're in this for the long haul, so we're committed to it. We have very specific ESG targets, and we do a lot of work on recycling. So our asset, we put in an upgrade and a refurbishment process which extends its useful life. So we don't scrap them. We don't scrap all of them. Some of them are beyond repair and they have to be sent away. But when they're scrapped, every bit of that metal is recycled and reused. But we keep our products out there, and it obviously extends the useful life, which gives you a better capital return, but it minimises the impact on the environment. And we do a lot of work particularly through TRAC Tire, to manage our, what you call the outputs of our process. So, in 2024, we recycled 19 million pounds of chassis metal,
Wow.
2.3 million pounds of rims, and 1.9 million pounds of scrap metal. And TRAC Tire Services, because of the retreading, it's got a really tight quality control process to make sure that our tyre solutions are sustainable. And so we reduced our carbon footprint by 70% with our tyre retreading, so retreading the tyres as opposed to going to buy new ones. And we recycled 2 million pounds of tyre rubber dust and 104,000 tyres in 2024. So, and the dust then is used, goes into various things like matting in playgrounds and all that sort of stuff. So, we're very big on it. We track on it. We report out on it to ourselves every month and to the board every quarter. And we're very proud of the program that we've got here. So it's all about reuse, recycle, and minimising our footprint. And also, with our cap and casings on the tyres, we're trying to continually get those better. That reduces miles per gallon and fossil fuel consumption. So, we're all over that. It's led through one of our executive vice presidents who does that in conjunction with other things, and she's doing a wonderful job on that. And we're very proud of the record. And by the way, Michelle, our customers want it. They expect it, quite rightly. And if you're able, you've got to be able to point to something real and substantial. Now, you can't just say, well, we're doing our best. You've got to have data behind it, and you've got to be able to demonstrate it. And it's proven very beneficial for us.
Yes, and of course your customers want it because, particularly at the base of Home Depot, consumers expect it, and it's just this cycle, and we just want to make sure that customers feels like we're listening to them,
I
and we
agree.
appreciate you listening to us.
Yeah, it's a virtuous circle, right? You get into this thing and everyone does better out of it. The planet does better, the consumer does better, the companies do better. It's a good path to be on, and we've got no intention of getting off it. So, and also I think that it's always easier to just do the right thing, really, isn't it?
It is
I think
every time.
it's just simple, and I think you can innately sense when you are and when you are not, and and we definitely want to fall on the ledger of where we're doing the right thing. That's one of our core values, and we intend to stick with it.
Yes, well, I appreciate that very much.
Great.
So you had mentioned earlier about wanting to attract and retain good talent and how important that is. Perhaps you could just share a little bit about what skills you think are most needed for the next generation of our leaders, and what how are you thinking about your talent planning process?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question. I think it depends on the level of of where you're coming in the organization. There's some kind of must-haves, which are more around being a decent human being, like not someone who tells lies, having the ability to get on with other people, being able to deliver a result without leaving a trail of bodies behind you. I mean, I think that sort of stuff is the kind of table stakes for actually being the type of person that other people want to be around. So we look for that, but I must tell you at the senior level, Michelle, and I'd be very interested in your perspective on this as well. When I'm recruiting at EVP and above, it's mostly about fit. Functional and technical competence is assumed, but it's how you're going to fit into the culture. Now you're going to be able to make a positive contribution to the culture without eroding it or undermining it, because we're very proud of our culture. So I think for that to happen, you need to have a few things. First of all, you've got to be strategically agile. You've got to be able to think strategically. And that's a clear differentiator, in my opinion. A lot of the times, people are very good at tactical activity, but they're not really good at thinking strategically. I'll give you an example. I've encountered in my career, a wonderful executive that I work with who'd fight you to the death for $5, and had all the detail orientation that you need in a low margin business like transportation was. But would do it to the point where sometimes he'd really upset, like $600 million customers, and it's like you got to try and sort of think beyond that. Like, do a deal, like get a favor, by helping someone, and don't just always be in a position where you have to be completely right. Be prepared to move a little bit, and I think that's a good example. Obviously, business acumen. I think there are a lot of executives out there that don't really understand their businesses, and I think that's a crying shame. And by that I mean they don't understand the numbers, they don't understand how the business makes money, they don't understand their customers. I think there are tons of good ones out there, but there are a lot of people that just think, well, if I'm good in my particular area of the company, then that's enough for me to get by. I don't rate that at all. I have a very different view. I think people need to understand businesses in their entirety, and they need to know how they work. I think the other thing is you've got to be empathetic, and I think you've got to be able to understand how it is for other people. Be humble enough to remember what it was like when you were coming up, and and also recognise that people are motivated by different things. Some need a kick up the backside, others need the arm around the shoulder. Depending on the environment and depending on the situation, and you've got to be able to adjust like that. A bit of compassion goes a long way too. I mean, often when you work very closely with people, things can happen to them in their personal life which are upsetting. A relative gets sick, heaven forbid, someone passes, divorce, whatever. It doesn't hurt to be a little compassionate. I think it's important to drive hard and to push people hard and to hold people to results, but you've also got to be compassionate, and understanding, I think, of what's going on. And for me, and this is just a personal thing, but for me, loyalty is a really big thing. I look for loyal people, and I'm a very loyal person. And if you're disloyal, in my opinion, you can't unring that bell. You're always known as someone who's not quite to be trusted.
Yes, yes.
And I think there's some things which are career limiters, and there's some things which are career derailers. And that's a career derailer, especially if you have ambition to get to a senior leadership role in a big outfit and get proper responsibility. Unless you're trustworthy, it won't happen.
Yeah, that's so true. I think part of that trustworthiness too is creating a culture where folks are willing and able and comfortable bringing bad news. So that way everybody is working off the same set of facts, nothing's being covered up. And I think that helps the trustworthiness if they know that they can come to you with a message and you will accept it in the positive intent in which it's intended.
Great.
That helps, I think, to create that environment that you're looking for. So
That's
that,
another one too, right? I mean, how often do you hear that? And then the minute sometimes, then the minute bad news comes out, there's an explosion.
yeah,
Yeah, it's like, well, I
yeah.
mean, if you actually say it, people might, like think about it the other way. Imagine if they didn't tell you and you're
Right,
just going
exactly.
along comfortably and then all of a sudden it emerged over the hill like Enron or something like that. Yeah, I mean, you want people telling you about what's going on. Because it is quite amazing to me, Michelle, that I mean, companies are organisms, right? They form their own character, their own identity, they evolve a certain way. But the number of times, if you can have a group of very intelligent people sitting around a table talking all day about a particular thing, but they don't discuss the most important thing, because they think it'll be unsettling, or someone will think they're not being positive, or they are concerned about how it's going to be perceived. And then in the end, when you actually go to do this thing, you realize we haven't talked about what's the most critical thing because someone's worried that it could be wrong. So I think you really do have to create an environment where you get people to bring stuff out there. And a good way to do it is to be humble and to recognize that there are people around you that know a lot more about things than you do.
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
And that's what I used to say is deliver good news fast and bad news faster. And that way
100%.
we know what we're dealing with.
Yeah, there's no problem we can't solve. It's just you've got to know about it.
Exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
And being able to communicate before somebody asks you about it is is such an expectation these days. So you gotta know about it though before you can tell others.
And
So
a bit of managerial courage as well.
yeah.
I think that sometimes CEOs don't want to know because then they don't want to have, so they don't have to tell the board. And vice versa. You've got to have the courage to put it out there. You have to be tactful and respectful and all the rest, but you've got to be willing to put it out there, 100%.
Yeah, well, that's great. Well, as you know, Transportation Talks is sponsored by the Transportation Supply Chain Institute at the University of Denver, and I'm very honored to have a relationship with the University of Denver for a number of years in several capacities. I know you have your MBA,
I
and
do.
which is great. And I'm just curious, as you think about developing and growing your talent, what's your perspective on an advanced degree, and how do you think it's helped you climb the career ladder?
Well, two answers to that question. For me personally, the best thing about doing my MBA was, I was in my late 20s when I started it and finished it. And it was putting models around stuff that you intuitively knew, or that you'd learnt from being in business. And suddenly someone explains it really simply with a really nice chart, and it's a validation of some of the stuff that you've learnt along the way. The other thing is you learn things that you just didn't know. And like one example for me was about how humans handle stress. And if you think about stress as a continuum, with one end being that you're not stressed at all, and the other end being that you're highly stressed. I can still remember, I'm in my mind in this lecture, the guy explaining it to me and saying if someone's highly stressed, it impacts their ability to accurately assess the actions of significant others, right? So if you're highly stressed and someone came to you, Michelle, and said, "Congratulations, you just won Powerball. You got $1 billion," you'd be thinking, "Oh, how am I going to break it up between the family? The kids are going to want some, and then I got the cousin, I got to pay all this bloody tax, and then I got all this stuff, Whereas really, you should be saying,
Hey.
and I thought that was because I recognised that in myself when the person was explaining it, and I think that was a good business lesson, but more importantly, it was a good life lesson. That when you put yourself under immense pressure, you don't interpret things well, and you make mistakes, and that can be problematic for relationships. It can be problematic, for business, for whatever. And so, for me, that was something that came out, a good example of something that came out of an MBA, which was a business learning, but also a personal learning. And for me, that was great. And then the second thing I would say is like when I moved to London, Brambles at the time was going through a restructure, and they're looking to lift their talent bench. And they had what's called the leadership development program. and you couldn't get on it unless you had an MBA. So
Oh,
there was and they were out recruiting from the good business schools, and that was a program where you got to spend, you did 3 12-month rotations, and then you moved into the business. And you also did a bit of training with some of these other kids. So Australian kid who just moved to London, and I got on that program. I was with Argentinians, I was with French people, Spaniards, Brits, and all of a sudden I was in this really diverse group, learning with all these really cool people, moving to different parts of the business. And only the key to getting inside that door for me was having an MBA. If I hadn't have done it, if I'd decided, oh, I'm not going to finish it, or I'm just going to, coast, um, I wouldn't have got that opportunity. Now, I know, now that, there's debate, but I guess you could say that it makes me old-fashioned. I'm a big believer in postgraduate education. I think it makes you a better person, gives you time to stop and think. And I think it's a material differentiator if you look at how people perform in business.
yes. And just based on what you said about your diverse leadership development class, I mean, when you think about that networking that
Oh,
you,
yeah.
and I'm sure you probably stay in contact with some of those folks today and have something in common that kind of leads you all together.
100%. A lot of us are all still friends, and they've gone on to do some incredible things, all over the world. So it was just a great moment for me. I was very lucky to get it, and my MBA was key to that happening.
Well, I could actually speak with you until next Tuesday for sure and have more questions I could do. But I just want to ask one question because this was asked of me on a podcast and it gave me an opportunity to recognize a mentor
Yeah.
that really meant a lot to me. Is there anyone that comes to mind that you say, wow, I'm so happy they were in my life and what a mentor they were for me?
Yeah. So, does it have to be someone in a professional context?
No,
Yeah.
no.
Well, then it'd definitely be my wife, Simone. She's probably the only person that I really listen to, and which is more to do with the fault on my side than others. But I think, Simone is a very wise person, very loving person, but she's really committed to living a fun life. She wants to enjoy her life, and she's very, very strong on it. And there've been multiple times, because she's a careerist as well, where we've been faced with choices that, would have been great for the bank balance and great for the career and all that, but we just would have hated doing it. And she's just like, well, don't do it. Like it's ridiculous. And the delight that she takes in our family, our children, in travel, and everything else that the world has to offer, has been very impactful on my life. It's brought a softness to my life that wasn't in it prior to me meeting her. And it's definitely made me a better person. And I've enjoyed my life more from having her in it, and for that I owe her everything.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. That was great.
Yeah,
And
cool.
Dan, thank you so much for being my guest on Transportation Talks. This was so much fun. And as I said, I could talk to you till the cows come home, but I hope that we continue to cross paths. And I wish you all the best in your role as CEO of TRAC Intermodal. And, I hope you'll join us in the future for another event. Maybe you'll send a student to the
Yeah, I'll come
Transportation.
back anytime you want me, Michelle. And thanks very much for giving me time. You and I have been through a lot together over the years. Great to see you again, and congrats on everything that you're doing here. I think it's a fantastic initiative. It's great for our industry. I listened to all the other ones, and I think you're doing an incredible job. So I'm just happy to be part of it and happy to support it however I can.
Oh, thank you. And to everyone else, our next guest is going to be Ann Rinke. She's the president of IANA, and you'll hear that in November. So stay tuned. Look for us on LinkedIn and YouTube. And again, Dan, thank you so much. Really appreciate you.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Michelle.